how do I rightly order where I live? I live in Oklahoma, where we are more free to build and live to the betterment of our children, but both my wife's and my family are in Michigan and want us to move back. It's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
What do you guys think?
When I was younger, I was much more of the move to a church. I mean, I did it, but I look back and realize I should have cared more about roots and family than I did. You're just not thinking in those categories when you don't have kids and you're in your 20s. But then you have kids and you see the relationship to their grandparents and you live half a nation away and you realize that's not insignificant. So have you lived in like Oklahoma for like 8 months? You work a remote job. You would have something. You went back to Michigan. You could totally afford it. Is that the scenario? A good church? Like you haven't found a good church in Oklahoma. There is a church you could go back to. Or is where they live in Michigan, a town of 2,000 people. There's no good church. There's no good work to do. You have a flourishing job in Oklahoma. Those are the things that I would weigh. All else being equal, what's the church situation? What is the job situation you have to work? And then if all else is equal, you could do both. You could be in a good church. You could be in a good place. I do think family wins out. Like those freedoms, like it's not insignificant, the difference between Michigan and Oklahoma. But if all else being equal, because like small towns, you won't feel it the same way. Like here in Georgetown, we don't feel the same way you would in Austin. You don't see the same amount of pride flags. You don't have the same defunding of police. So if all else being equal, I know one's a blue state, one's a red state. I do think family breaks the tie. But again, there are factors to say, but I wouldn't be able to really afford to live.
Yeah.
Or it'd be much tighter. Then you could say, no, we're going to stay here. And what we're going to do is work towards mom and dad moving towards us.
Right.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say is in that scenario, so you have red state, blue state, but it's not just like, all right, so I'm going to pick a better state. You know, it's on the one hand, I have a red state. On the other hand, I have mom and dad. I have family. So state versus family. Well, then that, you know, if you frame it like that, it sounds like, well, you got to go with family. But I think the better framing is to acknowledge, no, it's family versus family. Because by living in Oklahoma, you're going to have a much better life for your kids. And your kids are a part of your family.
Right.
And in fact, your kids, in terms of the order of Morris and our natural affections and our order of loves and these kinds of things, as a parent, as a father and a mother, you have a higher obligation under God, a moral obligation to your children than you do your mother and father. And I'm not making light of that. You have a high obligation to mother and father, to honor father and mother. It's not just a command for younger children while living underneath their father's roof. But I believe that, that the child, in the childhood years, living underneath your father's roof, you're called to obey your father and mother. But I believe that even the grown child who is left and began his own household, for this reason, a man, should leave his father and mother and cling fast to his wife. So taking a wife, starting a family, starting your own household, you're now an adult. You're no longer called to implicitly obey your mother and father, but you are called for life. Your whole life to honor your father and mother. So you have a high calling, a high obligation to your mother and father, but you have even that much higher to your children and to your wife. So it's wife first, then children, then parents. And so don't think of it as, it's Oklahoma versus mom and dad. No, it's in that scenario, it's children versus mom and dad. It's like, well, but if we move to Michigan for mom and dad, of course we're taking the children with us. Yeah. You're taking the children to Michigan.
Right.
And that has to be considered. And I'm not saying that, and therefore it's a clear no.
Right.
I'm not saying there's no scenario. But that is politically, economically, and culturally, in all three of those levels, that is a worse life for your children. Now, what are some of the pros? Those are the cons. Pros, the children get grandma and grandpa. Mm-hmm. That's a better life.
That's not nothing.
That's not nothing.
Yeah.
We moved to Texas in large part for grandma and grandpa, both sides. My wife was born and raised in California, but her parents, they saw the writing on the wall all the way back in 2013, and they left. And they moved to Texas, and I was born and raised in Texas. So for me, it was coming back home to my parents. And so we have two sets of grandma and grandpa, and it's incredible. It's incredible. But back to the final thing you said, just real briefly, I think this is some good pastoral counsel, and I've given it to a lot of people. Here's the reality practically and financially, economically. in most scenarios, not every scenario, I understand if mom and dad, right, let's say you're in your 40s or 50s and mom and dad, are bedridden, they're towards the end of their life, they have certain medical problems, there's insurance to be considered and who's their primary doctor, and they've been with them for, a decade and a half, and they need this, need that, for this surgery with this physician who's only in this state, and I get that, okay? But put that aside, unless there's extenuating circumstances like that, there may be, but if there's not, if your parents are in their 50s or 60s and they're reasonably healthy, not perfectly healthy, but reasonably healthy, it is 10 times easier for grandma and grandpa to move than for you.
Right.
Grandma and grandpa are at the stage of life where their children have left. They don't have to work. They're empty nesters. They don't have to factor in school, education. They don't have to, and for them, like, so my parents, like I said, I was born and raised in Texas, but we moved to Georgetown because that's where my wife's parents were. And my parents were still, a few hours away. And they moved here too. So they're in Georgetown also. But the reason why they moved, and they didn't just sit there and arrogantly demand, well, why are you moving there? And you need to move over, 4 hours over here to us. They recognize, no, it's much more easy. It's much easier for us to move than you. You have you have a wife and 5 kids, and you're in the beginning stages of your vocation and career, and trying to save money and buying your first home. And like we've had a mortgage, we have a home, we have equity, we have 20, 30, 35 years of work experience, and can transition with jobs or even go ahead and pull the trigger early and part way, not maybe entirely, but a hybrid of partial retirement, where now I'm going to work as a consultant, and I'm going to do remote. The 5-year-old, the 60, 65-year-old has those kinds of options of like, well, our house is almost paid off. We've got, $300,000 of equity. I could, with my work, my company, I've been there for 20 years, and I could probably work half-time remotely, and they would keep me as a consultant. I can start tapping early with my retirement and pick up, some things over here. Like the guy in his 30s with 5 kids who's trying to be obedient to the Lord and fruitful and multiply, but he's a millennial. And by the time he entered into manhood, the world, economically speaking, was destroyed, and the rug was ripped out from underneath his feet. To put that expectation on him is just not fair.
Right.
It's just not fair. So a lot of times it's like, so not only is it like you moving to Michigan, and that's a blue state, it's a worse state than Oklahoma, it's also way harder for you to move than mom and dad. And if mom and dad can't, because they're 85 and they can't get out of bed, and their physician happens to be then I get that. But if it's not that, and it's mom and dad won't, even though culturally, politically, and economically, at every single level, it would be easier for them than it would be for you, then I know it's hard to hear, but mom and dad are forsaking you. You're not forsaking them.
There's a different responsibility too. I'm the firstborn. I view it as my unique responsibility among my siblings to make sure my parents are taken care of.
Right.
The way my wife, who's the third-born woman, doesn't. I don't feel that same responsibility through her, and nor does she, to care for her parents, because there are other siblings. She has a firstborn, her brother is firstborn. So I feel that for my parents, and specifically would apply that. But if you're like the 5th, 6th son or daughter, you do have a different relationship to who's going to take care of mom and dad. Oh, big brother's got it, big sister already has it, and you maybe have a freedom. Or if you're the firstborn, you do maybe actually do it. Hey, no, I actually have to go back. They are aging, and I need to take care of them and see them into the afterlife.
The only thing I would add on to this is part of the calculus also is, am I putting my offspring in a situation where just the next generation is going to have to flee, possibly?
Right.
Literally was thinking that.
One of the things for us in Texas, and we don't know the future.
Right.
We don't know what's going to happen, but our plan, our goal, Lord willing, this would be a place that our children and our grandchildren would not have to flee from, so that they are not faced with the same decision that people in our time are having to make. And that being the case,
that if they do have to flee from here, then they would have had to flee from anywhere.
Fair
it's
enough.
like the type. In that case, the whole ship's going down, and this is the last part.
You're off to El Salvador, where it's just a flourishing Bitcoin economy.
The last thing I was going to say with that is, I know that some people feel like, well, it's hypocritical for me to leave, but then me not to want my children to leave. They'll see that we left and then they're going to leave. Well, that's just your parenting. You have to explain as age is appropriate why you left, what your goals are, what family is, what roots are. And if necessary, you do need to show what it means to care for your parents as they age. But the principle is not we're going to leave, they're going to leave. The principle is establishing roots with a community in a place that's safe and prosperous for families to grow. And if you're instructing your children in those biblical values, I mean, people still will move. It's not like we're all just going to be locked into the same town for the rest of, 700 years. But the likelihood, I think, is they'll catch the principle. The principle is near family, near a church for a long time, roots, connections, influence locally.
All right, the clock is running out. You need to go and register now for our Christ is King How to Defeat Trash World Conference. It's happening the year of our Lord 2025, April 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That's a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And by God's grace, we're able to provide for you an all-star lineup. We've got Steve Dace, Calvin Robinson, Orrin McIntyre, Dr. Stephen Wolf, Eric Kahn, David Reese, Andrew Isker, John Harris, A.D. Robles, Dan Burkholder, Dusty Devers, Ben Garrett, C.J. Engel, and yours truly, Pastor Joel Webben. Come on out, join us April 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2025, Thursday through a Saturday. Go to rightresponseconference.com to register today. Again, that's rightresponseconference.com.